To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me. Oh.
Everyone wants a village, but nobody wants to be a villager. Because being a villager means you have to close the loops on the damage you do. In this session, Jim and I dive into the central bank of dreams and the hard design problem of internalizing negative externalities. We're looking for the levers to transform money from a claim on lost life into an engine for regeneration. Enjoy. So let's put at the center today on the table and really poke at it the question, the explored but not really sufficiently defined question of what does the economy of Game B look like? And let's hit it off by giving ourselves a little definition of the playground. What do we think of as economy for the purpose of this conversation?
Yeah, basically, while Game B will think about each of these elements differently, both Game B and Game A economies approximately have the same shape, which we can think of as a cycle, which starts with production, then goes to consumption, to distribution, then goes to consumption, then goes to savings. What do we of the things that are created in the world in a given year? What is not consumed? Then investment, and then innovation. And innovation can be thought of as parallel to investment, essentially. And then it comes back to production. So,
I would add one more element to the cycle, which is sourcing.
Which is,
in order to produce, you need to have some stuff that you need to source from somewhere.
Source. You could have sourcing. Sourcing. Where does that fit in the cycle? It fits as part of production.
I would put it before production, really.
Yeah, right before production, and investment certainly goes before sourcing. So yeah, that's reasonable. Though one could argue that all sourcing is production. But okay, we'll add that for today's discussion.
Okay.
Now the macro difference is that in Game A's vision, what it can see, it only sees that which is denominated in money. Right? For instance, it sees being healthy not as a thing, right? Yet going to the hospital, that's a thing because you have to pay a bill. At least somebody has to pay the bill.
So that is signaling modality, right? So we have the circle and we have signaling across the circle to inform the elements. Okay.
There's many agents in the system, right? And one of the big innovations of Game A was that it got away from the command and control economies historically, where the king or the local noble or even just the local princeling gave out monopolies, who could do what, very strong restrictions on innovation. One of the things that allowed Game A to take off and crush the world was considerably increased freedom in the area of the economy. And particularly initially in England and the Netherlands, you combine it with finance, and you got lots of experimentation of what worked. And it turned out that method worked way better than the 10,000 years of command and control of the previous system. And many things were brought into being, but the problem was only those things that were brought into being were those that passed the monetary, the money on money return, a single dimensional measure. While in Game B, we think that, especially now that we have filled the planet, may not have mattered much when there were 600 million humans in 1700, but now with 8 billion and it's still growing slowly, the choices that we make at each point in that cycle have many ramifications above the local satisfaction of need or profit return.
Mhm. Okay, so it seems to me that it is worth not only looking at each point in that circle that you described and fleshing out the difference between how game B thinks about this versus game A, but also the signaling modality, because it appears that one core strength of game A is its signaling modality, but it's also at the same time its weakness.
Exactly. It was what allowed game A to break through and conquer all the other systems. It was one of three things that allowed it to do so. But it has no brakes. It's the system that has no brakes. In fact, the way our final version of game A, based on fractional reserve banking and central banker control, requires exponential growth or it will die. And we've seen it in its fluttering phase in 2008. We're probably going to see it again soon. A crisis of finance that's going to show the lack of robustness of this single dimensional signaling modality that requires exponential growth.
All right, so where in the cycle should we start? What's a good point to attack this?
Probably production is to my mind, or we could start with sourcing. Yes, let's go with sourcing. That actually is easier in some ways to explain multiple signaling modalities. The story I often tell is the story of a bioregion that wants to manage its fisheries, right? And I use a specific example, which is bluefish, which is a common variety of fish off the coast of Virginia, where I live. It reproduces at a pretty high rate, but you can overfish it. It's been overfished before. Further, it's not a fish that everybody likes. It's a strong, oily fish. And if you like fishy fish, it's one of your favorites. But if you don't, you don't. So it's not something everybody wants. And so our model on the bluefish coin, as we call it, story is that this bioregion, which has set itself up as a membrane of membranes, has hired some wildlife biologists to assess what the sustainable harvest of bluefish from our coastal waters is. And they come back with, let's say, 10 million pounds a year. And so 10 million pounds of sourcing tokens are issued per capita to the people of the region. Actually, the first 10 million tokens, special tokens, are given to the fishermen. And when the 10 million tokens are up, that the catch for the year is over. So as long as you have a token, you can catch a pound of fish, and fishermen can trade them amongst themselves. Those who prefer to fish for tuna or for flounder or whatever will swap back and forth. And the swapping sounds at first onerous, but one thing we can automate today is trading systems. And so everybody has an automated trading agent of great sophistication that allows them to establish their preferences. So I'm a blue fisherman and striped bass. That's all I do. So I trade anything that's not that for tokens in those domains. And the thing does it behind the scenes. If I want to do it manually, I can, but very unlikely you'll be able to out-trade the automated trading system. And so a group of fishermen end up with their the amount of bluefish tokens that they want. And oh, by the way, they can trade other things for bluefish tokens. They can provide trade oak tokens to another fisherman, right? You can trade anything, but to do a thing on a conserved resource, you need the right token. So the fishermen go out and catch their bluefish, and they bring it back. And then there's another 10 million tokens that are issued for consumers to the people who live in the Bayou region. And they can trade them with anybody in the world, again, using their automated trading agents. And any fish, bluefish from this region, needs to be one-on-one associated pound with the bluefish consumption token. And again, many people don't like bluefish, so they just mark down, no bluefish for me, and it gets traded for other stuff automatically behind the scenes. And those people who do want bluefish have bluefish tokens in their digital wallet, go to the store, buy 5 pounds of Bluefish, pay $5, let's say, and buy Bluefish tokens. So in this way, we have a second modality of signaling, not just one, that allows market type forces, because the market is one of the great inventions of human beings. It came long before Game A. There's been markets as far back as we know in the life of the village where A and B trade for things. So Game B does not want to get rid of markets, but it wants to make markets smarter and to make them consider far more things. And so there's a simple example of both sourcing, production, and distribution is applied in it, and consumption.
And let's expand on that. Now, we stay in Virginia, but I want to have red snapper or salmon. So how do I get that in the sourcing context?
Let's say red snappers down in Virginia, down in Florida. That's where in the Gulf Coast, that area, and they have a market, and they have a market for consumption tokens. Let's say the same model as the Bluefish tokens, and I just bid for them. And if I really, really want red snapper today, I give a whole bunch of my Bluefish tokens or some other tokens I have for them. If I'm sort of indifferent, I say, oh, I want some fish. My preference rank is snapper, flounder, cod. Agent, go out and get me one of them. What is the currently best trade-off versus the other tokens that I hold? And so these supplies can come from anywhere, and then there will be a statistically predictable pattern of how many red snapper tokens get called in Virginia every day, which will then provide a signal to the distribution arm of the fisheries, right? Let's say every day 5,000 pounds of red snapper are ordered up for consumption in Virginia. That is knowledge that the distribution people know, and so they move 5,000 approximately, with a little bit of storage in there, because of course, approximately 5,000 pounds of red snapper up to Virginia every day.
So it would
be go ahead.
So it would be interesting to see where the resource constraints are of the planet in the system, right? Because if you're adding the resource constraints into the market system, what you're doing with this model, then you need to have an understanding of, is that actually feasible in terms of the provision of everything that's needed, right? So is it possible to provide glass to everybody who needs glass in this scenario, right? On the planet.
Yeah, and that's where the investment side comes, right? Which is, let's say we're under-resourced in glass. At some macro level, we may determine that we want more glass, even if it's not economic in the pure money-on-money return perspective, and which probably involves some subsidies to say that we're going to reduce the cost of glass by taking something out of our investment pool and use it to subsidize the purchasing of glass, which will then pull downstream the production of glass.
Or you use the investment pool for innovation and find localized pathways to creating glass-like materials, so that you don't have to do across the planet trading. And you could also, in that, reduce the load on the planet.
Yeah, and yes, that would be the innovation side. Yeah, innovation / investment side. The other thing, of course, you could change culture. This is very important. Throwing away your soda bottles is not a good thing. The U.S., at least, we tried all this recycling, but it turns out most recycling isn't economic anymore. Or it turns out only small amounts of glass can be usefully, economically recycled, but they can be usefully recycled. So changing the norms and maybe the regulations and the accords such that all glass is recycled, period, would very substantially reduce the amount of glass you need.
That's, so there are multiple, of course, that's multiple dimensions. And the question is, how's that baked into the economic model? So, and your response now would be that um, there's also a token on glass-like materials that then drives the recycling because the constraints are limited, or the constraints are reflected in the amount of tokens that are in circulation. So there's a strong incentive towards recycling or less use.
That would be a economic only now, but it may turn out you may have to go further and have an accord, which is the
Mm,
equivalent of legislation, more or less, which
mm,
says
mm,
thou shalt recycle glass. That is a moral
mm,
commitment of our community that to throw your glass away, even if it's economically reasonable to do so, because glass is heavy and it's very marginal economically to recycle. Low value and heavy, not a good combination, as it turns out. That we just decide overall as a society that recycling glass is important.
So we see in Game A that there is mostly because of the faulty error correction of the market system, there's leakage into the governance system, right? That's so how is that prevented in that case? Because you just opened that pathway, right? So the leakage from the market into the accord.
Yeah, this is of course a huge design problem in governance. So we have
Mm-hmm,
the market is one big engine, governance is another,
mm-hmm,
and one of the Game B system of governance is going to have to be resistant to capture by financial forces. How we do that well is an interesting question. Part of it is that, to the degree possible, authority is pushed down in Game B governance to the lowest possible level, but that may not actually work for some of these environmental questions, which have broader scope. And I don't have an answer off the top of my head today on that one, but it's
mm-hmm.
clearly a design issue on governance, and you're right to point out that to the degree that the tokenized market-driven economy still exists, it will have incentives to bend the accords to things that are favorable in its direction.
Well, maybe let's go deeper into the tokenized market system in hooking it into something you said earlier, which is there are many things in Game A that are not reflected in the market because they cannot be expressed as the singular signaling function the market has to offer, which is money, right? So any kind of service to community, to other people, to life, you mentioned shaman as an example, will not be reflected in that market. And the issue with that is that it's non-quantifiable usually, right? The amount of care you put into something or a person is not usually equal to the amount of time. So you cannot use time as a proxy to measure care. And care is a very subjective thing. So it's effectively, it's really hard to tokenize that. And but it must play a role, right?
Yeah,
So how do we factor
yeah,
that in?
yeah. I would not tokenize things like that. The things down to the
Mm-hmm,
local, very important. Tokenization, its benefit is to allow people to operate together who don't know each other or have any trust indicator between them, right? That's really where money came from, so that you could do things at long range. Historically, most trade locally was either gift economy or social convention. If you killed a big animal, it was your moral duty to share it with your neighbor, etc. I would say the same is likely to be true for much of the care economy. So, for instance, let's say we have a community at the Dunbar number, our little
mm-hmm,
classic model. And I believe that a natural place for a lot of decision making about economic matters is going to be at the mesoscale rather than the individual. The individual will
mm-hmm,
have some amount tokens to choose. Maybe a bunch, maybe a little, and it may vary from community to community, but there will also be a significant amount of, let's call it, economic energy at the community level. And so the community may choose to allocate the support of 20 of its members to care functions and say, you guys get, your per capita share of everything, and you don't really you're not really playing the same game. You're being hired essentially by the community to provide your services.
Hmm. I want to invoke my mentor in all things money, Bernard Lietaer, and I think you might have heard me tell the story before, where he was invited by the Belgian government to help sort out an issue in the city of Ghent. There were undocumented immigrants in one part of town, and with their inability to have stable jobs came the usual downward spiral of substance abuse, violence, desolation, and nobody knew how to help those people. So Bernard went in to ask them about their dream. And the dream was to have a piece of land. The most common dream was to have a piece of land so they could grow something. So he got a piece of land from the city, parcelized it, and then created a currency that you could rent this piece of land with by, the only way to earn that token, that currency, was by being nice to your neighbors, doing cleaning the streets, cleaning the house, putting flowers in the windows, etc. Right? So caring. And that incentive structure, based in individual dream, then helped those people to create a more conducive environment to getting out of the downward spiral, which they did. And so they got themselves legalized and got jobs, etc. And this was replicated, so it reliably worked. And Bernard went further and turned this into his big dream of life, in the sense that he was imagining a global central bank of dreams, in which everybody deposits their big dream of life, and in us. So if you imagine the big dream of life of Jim is deposited in that big central bank, Thomas walks around somewhere, does something that happens to make your dream more real. Jim token is created. I get some of that as a token of appreciation, but my baker doesn't know Jim, so I cannot trade Jim token for bread. But I don't have to, because if everybody is in the business of fulfilling each other's dreams and their own dreams, and by doing so each other's dreams, because if you follow your passion, usually that involves something for other people. People want to create houses and beautiful clothes and amazing food and etc. Then everybody would be taken care of. Right? For a long time, I didn't really get this. I couldn't understand how a former high finance dude, because he used to be head of the Central Bank of Belgium, could come up with such a hippie pipe dream. But when I in my mind solved the material sourcing problem to this, which could be solved in biomimicry and biomimetic ways, heliogenic, how we would call it, so that you actually have the resource base to fulfill your own and other people's dreams, then that changes the equation, and you have a modality in which you can move into a gift economy by liberating the resourcing, the sourcing function in all of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you can reduce the cost of the sourcing function substantially and localize it, then that can change the dynamic considerably.
Mm-hmm.
The question is how, you and I have talked about before, if you could reduce the cost of sourcing, you could win in game A, right? So, and the fact that such things have not yet come into being indicates that they're hard to do. And so the question is, how hard are they to do? Are they realistic? And I think the answer will be shown one way or the other, right?
Yeah, but that's the part of the investment and innovation element, right? I mean, the most successful economy on this planet so far still is nature, right? Nature moves 150 billion tons of matter every year, and we only manage 100 billion. So, so without any intervention, nature already is more successful than us. So if and we've known how to use wood and fabric and other fibers to create fabric and houses and all of that for a long time. Right? So I think the threshold of that actually working is not that high. Right? There's a high probability for satisfying a large portion of the material input for a localized economy with natural pathways. But it's not there. You're right.
Very helpful. Yeah, and other thing to keep in mind is it will vary by climatic region. Certain things like bamboo, easy to grow in tropical regions. Hardwoods, not so easy to grow, or at least not, they don't grow very fast in tropical regions. So there will inevitably still have to be true.
But it's a great example. So, I mean, there's an element of bamboo grows fast, but it also breaks down fast. Now, can you increase its or optimize its properties with a local process, like curing bamboo such that you can use it for hot water piping, for example? Yeah, totally imaginable and possible, right? So then this turns into a high value product suddenly from a very low value product that you have to replace every couple of years.
Yeah, and may be able to tweak it with genetic engineering too, right? Or at least a breeding program to have it closer to the need of what you're trying to do. I will say that a ethos of Game B, not necessarily in economics, but an ethos that we believe is useful and important, is to increase the amount of local production for a bunch of reasons, particularly resilience, right? We are very dependent on an extremely thin network. Half the people on Earth are dependent on the grain being produced in the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Russia, and the Ukraine, basically. And should something happen to those crops, many, many billions of people are going to starve, or at least hundreds of millions are going to starve. And an ethos of producing at least enough food to survive locally would be a very powerful thing. And even though it may not be economic, these in Game A terms, these giant industrialized farms, man, they produce some crazy yields with tremendous applications of chemicals and diesel tractors and highly optimized, genetically engineered, variants, etc. And so one will have to choose, at least when it's still embedded in Game A, to be less efficient, quote unquote, by choosing to source resources locally. And that comes from the ethos, right? The culture. We don't have to do the bad thing.
But it might be more than ethos, because if you follow the example of nutrition, and you imagine being actually directly involved in the sourcing of that, which we know gives satisfaction, deep satisfaction on a biophysical level, right? Getting your hands dirty in soil actually changes your biome, preferably to a better mental health state. and also doing that in community with other people is has also shown to be better for your health, mental health. And then the quality of the food is likely to be better than chemically produced food, like in conventional agriculture at the moment, which also makes you more healthy. All things that are not priced into the game A optimization, right? And the question is, does it need to be reflected in signals at all? Because once you know this, once you've experienced this to be true, as a human being, you are able to integrate all of that complexity into a sense of this is better for me, so I'm going to do it. So I don't need additional incentive structures around me to do this because I already feel that it's better. And I'm struggling with
that's good.
how to integrate that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point as we're sort of thinking this through. Um, 2 points. One is the idea of carving things out from signaling modalities entirely is interesting, right? On the other hand, such carving out, particularly, let's say, for producing food for a community, has got to be a collective decision. One person growing their own food in their backyard, that's interesting. But much more interesting is the community doing it together by a collective action decision that may be totally ignoring signaling modalities, except negative ones, right? So that, say, you can only use so much artificial fertilizer, let's say. Some constraints that signaling provides. Then it requires it now lives in a different realm. It now lives in the social collective action realm, essentially. That people in a community decide they're going to grow their food together. So it's economic in one sense, and that is.
Go ahead. Economic in one sense, and then.
But yes, in one sense, in that you're sourcing and producing, but it is decoupled from signaling modalities pretty much entirely, or could be.
Yeah, where I wanted to go with this is more into what if the signaling already exists on the level of complexity required, and this the signaling is us living inside of that, you would call it a product B, inside of that community, and integrating all of the non-tokenizable signals into a coherent feeling, into a sense of, is this good or is this not good? So it becomes much more a cultural fabric than what's happening in my mind right now is that culture and the economy are woven together much more deeply, but in an appropriate way, which, by the way, they are already, right? Game A is really hijacking the culture for its purposes, right? But let's say they cannot even be separated. So you mentioned culture earlier. So maybe culture is the stronger driver into creating a game B appropriate economy than tokenization is.
Yeah, both are going to be important for sure, and as we systems still have to be relatively efficient, right? The Soviet Union, communism was a sign. What happens if you sacrifice too much on the economic side? not on economic, but on doing things in a sensible fashion. The signals weren't correct in that system. And in the pre-game A world, the wealth of the world was very low. Most people lived in mud huts and died by the time they were 30, right? And having signaling modalities of sufficient organizational power is still going to be important. But on the other hand, there are a lot of things that even the most intricate signaling modalities are not going to answer. And I do think you're right that culture or accords or making decisions about the adjacent possible may not have anything to do with the traditionally thought through, even extended versions of signaling modalities. For instance, that's something I've been thinking a fair bit about since I wrote those essays about the adjacent possible. Is under Game A, things are brought into being which are clearly bad for, at least I would say clearly bad. Sports gambling apps are currently the plague of young men in America, right? They've only been legalized it for a couple of years. And how did that decision get made that we would have sports gambling apps? The answer was somebody corrupted some state legislatures, right? Some money guys. They got legislation in a couple of states passed. They built their apps. They were really successful. That provided an example to other people who got lobbying in many other states to be legalized. And over a period of about 6 or 7 years, something like half the country now has legalized sports gambling apps, and they're ridiculously profitable. And yet they are impoverishing and just kind of capturing the brains in a bad way of 25-year-old working class men, and not just working class men, all kinds of men. So that bridge of the adjacent possible is one area where culture, or even something stronger than culture, ethos, comes into play. But it's not entirely clear how you implement that. You don't want a centralized decider of what comes into existence, or at least it needs to have a strong constituent process, so that there really is a sense of the culture, what is appropriate to bring into being. TikTok, I would say, is another example that basically just sucks up all the unused attention of people into the most banal stuff imaginable. And yet it's clearly very addictive, brilliantly designed as a long-term professional designer of online products. The instant I saw it, I said, this is the most brilliant of all products so far, and also the most evil. This is like just exactly how you suck the attention of people in unlimited quantity, essentially.
But I think that's a good example of how ethos and tokenization is interconnected, right? Because the reason why this is happening is money on money return, essentially, right? The competition over participating in that game of scarce money supply, it leads to disformed ethos, right? An ethos that is not really aligned with what probably naturally emerge in a environment where people along the Dunbar scale live in nature and in a self-supporting way 100%. So if we imagine a place like that, like a little paradise where people can live in that kind of environment and actually feed themselves and house themselves and clothe themselves, so in a way that they feel they're thriving, then that's a different kind of ethos would emerge out of that. So to me, the mistake of token design comes first, and ethos grows out of that. So if
and vice
so,
versa, though, the ethos to inform. I think their cycle. The ethos, let's say the proto ethos, has to drive the token design, and then the token design has to upregulate the ethos.
Yeah, of course. But so the our that's how it ratchets up. But what I'm
Right.
trying to say is the people who came up with the sports bet apps, they didn't design the tokens. They are a product of the ethos that was generated by the tokens. And so they're just acting out what it wants. So what you and I are trying to do here, and many other people, is trying to set that first stage, right? So what is the most likely design to then ratchet up a circle towards an ethos that's actually aligned with what human thriving might be about? And I think that's
Let's
the
go back to our circle. Right?
yeah, okay, go. Let's go back to the circle. Hmm?
So finish your thought. Finish your thought.
The thought was that this then links back to Bernard's dream of dreams, because if you create the incentive structure towards fulfilling dreams, the token will look different than if it is purely a rational economic tokenized model. That's what I want to say. But let's keep that in mind as we go back to the circle.
To have to. Okay, yeah. So back to the circle, we start thinking about where could we intervene on the circle to, with respect to the adjacent possible. And there's an obvious place, which is at the investment part in the circle. One of my views, at least, of game B economics is that the control of investable assets, as opposed to consumption assets, needs to be controlled by things other than individuals, right? So that, for instance, a proto B could be a nexus of investment. Let's say the people of the proto B save 10% of their income, which is a good, healthy amount to save. And that 10% goes to the Proto B Capital Fund, which can be invested in enterprises to produce new productive stuff, or it could be used internally for building commons, etc. But the decision is made collectively as opposed to egomaniacally or hedonistically on how to allocate the surplus, the social surplus. Without a social surplus, the society falls apart. If only because there's no maintenance of the equipment, no replacement of stuff that wears out, no new farmland, etc. So if the ethos begins to grow at the, let's say, proto B level, then that is a place in which the investment decisions start to be made differently. Somebody comes to the bank of proto B 17 and says, we want you to contribute 100 grand into this fund to fund the sporting app. We go, we don't do sport apps. Sorry, that's bad, right? And over time, as more and more of the investable assets come under control of the game B ethos, then the adjacent possible will be no longer fundable. And so this is mature.
This feels to me very much like the cooperative model. Right. So in Italy, Spain, Latin America, cooperatives are very strong. And where do you draw the distinction between the game B economy and a cooperative? Because
it's quite possible that a proto B could be set up as a cooperative, for instance. And the U.S. now has some pretty interesting improved laws on cooperatives that allow external capital to come into them. It was extremely difficult to finance a co-op in the United States because of the law that essentially the members had to bring the capital with them. And that's a significant limiting factor. But the new so-called hybrid co-op laws allow external funding in some constrained ways, but still probably sufficient to do some interesting things. And so I think co-ops are an interesting legal form, but I think by them, they are part of an ethos, which is sharing, and that decisions are made collectively. Because at least in the U.S., one of the hard rules of co-ops is that every member has exactly one vote, which is kind of interesting in the decisions of the co-op. So it's a potential form, but I would say not the only form that might work.
Yeah, but what would you say is the difference? So why can't we just go? Why do we engage in the complex conversation around what is game B and what is a proto B and what is a B economy? Why don't we just say, okay, let's all do cooperatives? What's the difference in your mind between those two?
Interesting question. There's no reason that co-ops can't still be caught in multipolar traps. If you replaced every corporation in America with a co-op, it's not entirely clear their behavior would change. Might, if the ethos was farther enough along, it could. This is actually a good conversation. That one could see this as one slope for the transition. That as we move towards more cooperative structures, and the ethos changes of the decision makers, and the decision makers are essentially all the people involved in the organization, then you could see a natural evolution toward more pro-social behavior. But you could also see it go the other way. You could see it become more rapacious, right? These co-op people, we're going to be a pirate band. We're going to fuck everybody over for our own benefit. There's nothing per se about a co-op that says it has to be pro-social. Other than I think there is I think it's the.
Except that yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a very interesting thought. Well, this has been a kind of hazy conversation. There's been at least a few good thoughts in it. One of which is co-ops probably help mitigate the sociopath problem. The capital has become almost purely a sociopath, right? At the level of asset allocation, private equity firms, venture capital firms, their capital is almost entirely amoral, and that is a major gauge on what the adjacent possible becomes. If new companies were co-ops, they may not fall under the second part of this is that the people who tend to lead companies are disproportionately sociopaths. Not all of them, but maybe 10%. And then, as we know, the problem of the multipolar trap that forces other people into following those behaviors. If the co-op was a form of immune system against sociopathic capture, that alone would help a lot.
But it seems to be that that's the case, because the possibility for capture by single individuals or even by small groups seems to be very, very low inside of cooperative. I mean, partially due to the fact that every one member, one vote, but also the ethos required to join a co-op in the beginning is one that recognizes that in being part of that group, you only are you're powerful as a group, but not as an individual. You're in a mutual support structure. That's what a cooperative actually is, right? So you already have a selection process towards less psychopathic behavior.
I don't know if you've frozen up there, or
I'm back.
Your sound has dropped off, or what?
I'm back. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So
I can hear you.
Did you catch that?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that.
No. No.
Was that?
Did you catch that? What I just said about filtering psychopaths? That
Yeah, I caught
the
enough of it. Yeah,
okay. Go ahead.
yeah, and associated with that are new governance structures that aren't built on the big man model, right? The command and control hierarchical positions. Now, a lot of co-ops are still run quite traditionally in terms of their management structure. There's a giant milk co-op in our area that is run just like any other corporation, though it is externally it's better probably. And that gives a much better deal to the owners, who are the dairy farmers. And there's another co-op, actually my next door neighbor was one of the founders of, which is a turkey processing co-op. But in terms of its externalities, it's no better than any other. So there's no guarantee that the co-ops will be better players for sure. But so they probably also need a second internal change in their governance modalities internally, how they decide. A lot of them are just copied the Game A methods because they work, right? They're relatively efficient. And so developing a way like sociocracy, something like that, to have more group-oriented decision nodes throughout the organization might also be important in producing the ethos that we need to, reduce the exploitation game.
So what I just heard was that one core element in Game B economics is internalizing negative externalities or pricing them in. And one modality could be the multi-token system, but that is the core differentiator between Game B economics and the cooperative. That a cooperative can still externalize as a whole, but in Game B economics, negative externalization should not be possible.
Yeah, or at least a lot harder. And part of that would be tokens, part of it would be accords, and part of it would be different internal management structures that don't feel as driven to hyper optimization as ones that are command and control oriented, where I am the boss, the success adheres to me, my ego grows when this thing grows, right? Instead, it's a committee of people who are managing the company, and committees all the way down essentially might well produce a different ethos. It's a combination of ethos, signaling modalities. I'm going to write this down: signaling modalities, ethos, and governance structures. And that sort of includes co-ops at two levels. One, co-ops are probably better than the alternatives, but even co-ops need to have day-to-day management structures which are more conducive to Game B aims for the economy.
But they don't include the only implicitly and only to a certain extent include the internalization of negative externalities. And I think that's a crucial element in Game B. So the question is, what other modalities beyond ethos and managing the commons through additional token systems could there be for a Game B economy to internalize negative externalities? I think that's an important question.
That is always an important question. Signaling modalities provide a significant opportunity. Ethos provides another. Maybe ethos is enough if ethos reaches a level of strength. Let's use the sports gambling analogy. What would prevent a company that discovered the opportunity from executing on it? Actually, that may not be a good example because it turned out they had to hack the legislature to get it to get a
I wonder if Steve Jobs would have gone through with creating the iPhone and iPad if his children were forced to use them. So I think it's real life connection to the negative externalities you're creating. You have to eat the dog food you're creating, right? Basically. So if what could a loop look like in the game in the sports bet situation where the makers of that app would have to um, uh, would be exposed to the negative externalities directly, right?
interesting, probably, I know techies. Most techies don't like betting because they're too smart. They know it's stupid, right? So
Hmm.
the creators of the sports betting app probably are not users of the sports betting
Exactly.
app.
And neither are their
It's like
friends, right? So
uh,
if you create a sports betting app,
nor are their friends.
yeah. So if you create a sports betting app, but while you're doing so, you're just starting to exploit all of your friends and your family, then you might consider not doing it. Um, so it's a question of relationality between you and wherever the negative externality occurs. And if you close that loop, then you will have a very, very personal incentive to reduce negative externalities.
As we point out, the sports gambling case, that may be very difficult, right? Because the
Hmm.
externalities may be far away from you. In fact, that's probably human nature, right? To fuck up somebody else's place, not your own place.
So maybe so since we're relying on complex integration of various token systems, could there be something like a radius token, something like that makes a product um, less interesting depending on the distance between the producer and the user.
Not obvious.
Mm. Okay, so we're having issues here with the connection. You're back. You were
Hello,
gone.
hello.
Yeah, we're having connection issues
Yeah,
today. You're here.
yeah,
I
much
hear
worse
you
than
now.
usual.
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
I'm here. I'm here.
Um, good, good. Here too. Um,
Oops.
okay.
Yeah, this conversation has showed how far we are from any coherent thinking about game v economics, but it's good raw material.
Yeah. So um, let's have a look at the circle again and see whether there's something useful to address still for the scope of this conversation, or whether we're in a place where we could wrap it for today's conversation, because you said it's kind of hazy, and it is, but we knew that it's an exploration. So we talked about signaling a lot. We talked about sourcing, production, innovation, and and funding, but not about distribution. So distribution might be an
Yes,
interesting point as well.
Now this, now this is, of course, what game A politics has always been about: distribution. Right? Society creates X and distributes it according to a function Y. Right? And if we look at things like the Gini index, that's at least a very rough signal for how unequal the distribution is. And in much of the West, especially the Anglosphere, the Gini index is probably up above where it was at the time of the French Revolution in France, right? With very high levels of income inequality. And now, which is interesting, is that the rich flaunted it less for quite a long while, right? Now they don't mind flaunting it. You know, the 40,000 square foot house, the $40 million wedding in Venice, the collection of the billionaire boats in wherever the hell it was recently, which I pointed out is probably not stable, with drone warfare. Anybody can take out a billionaire's yacht. I think within a few years, it's going to be extremely unsafe to have 50 billionaire yachts get together for a big party. I think 49 of them end up at the bottom, probably. Yeah, very, waterborne drone. You can build one for $25,000. It'll sink a billionaire's yacht. And by the way, people, a $1,000 DJI drone with a little bit of magnesium powder land on the wing of a private jet. It's done, right? So the asymmetrical warfare of the individual or very small group has now reached a stage that a lot of the more obnoxious attributes of game A will take care of themselves in due time. Let's see. So where are we? So anyway, that was a little side rant about distribution. My vision of game A distribution, game B distribution, is to be far more egalitarian. And if we study the kibbutz, it's a very interesting history of the kibbutz. Initially, the kibbutzes were all formed with what's called the common purse, where all the money that everybody made, no matter what they did, even if it was an inheritance, went into the treasury of the kibbutz, and everybody was provisioned by the kibbutz. And in fact, in the original kibbutzes, even the underwear was owned in common. It came out of the laundry, the kibbutz laundry. You got random person's underpants back. Of course, people rebelled about that pretty quickly. And many kibbutzes to this day still have shared dining, housing that's very similar, etc. But some of them have changed into a little bit less egalitarian. And most of them started giving a personal stipend out to everybody, but it was the same. The person that was the lawyer got the same personal stipend as the person that worked in the laundry. And whether that radical egalitarianism is totally consistent with human nature, I'm not entirely sure, but something grossly less steep than what we currently have, I think, is hugely important to build the social solidarity and the ethos for game B. That defining oneself in terms of what you own and what you can spend is really close to the core of the rottenness of game A.
Which could also be regulated by ethos itself, right? And not.
Yes, I've often said, how do you know you're in a game B community if somebody drives up in a Porsche and everybody laughs at them? And this is the biggest change in status games. Humans are always going to want to compete for status. But what is the nature of our status games? If our status games are how much we contribute to our community, what skills we have, what skills we can share, what skills we can teach, it's a very, very different world than what kind of shiny car and how big is my house kind of status games. So, and that would fall under the category of ethos, basically, and to a degree accords. if we actually want to make them enforceable. But it would be nice if we didn't, if we just got to the point where our ethos was such that people that played traditional game A status games in terms of possessions or positional goods or Instagrammable moments or whatever were just laughed at and thought of as clowns. That would be a moment that we felt like we are really starting to build game big.
Mm-hmm. To me, it seems that it might even go one step further, not laughing at them when they have a Porsche, but asking how one can help them to not have to need a Porsche anymore. And providing that as a service, right? Helping
that would be the
people.
culturally to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, give us your Porsche, which we'll sell, and then we will take you through a process where you laugh at yourself for having owned a Porsche.
Mm-hmm.
Now, question for you. This, as I said, this has been the age-old question of politics. Actually, goes way back before Game A. The late Roman Republic was torn apart partially by this question. Is it actually practical for humans to build relatively large-scale societies where everybody has about the same economic inputs? It's the age-old question, right? It's been tried both ways, and there's some evidence. But what do you think?
Well, I think it's a question of the sourcing, because so if you have a certain stability on the material security layer, then I think it becomes possible to thrive in that egalitarian modality. And I see this both in my own life, so the balance between trying to own just enough so that I can feel security for my family, but being in relationship with the community around us, trying to be in balance with this becomes easier at the point at which I feel that security for the family. So I don't need to, up to the point where I could say that if I knew reliably that the level of security for my family would be provided by the community, I wouldn't have to own what I own. So, because the only reason I need to own it is that security level. And that is easier in climatic regions that are more conducive to life, right? So, the other example that I've seen firsthand is Oroville, right? Oroville is in many parts a shit show, and a mirror image of the global Lockean shit show. But I've also seen that, at least among the young people that I know who live there, they seriously don't regard ownership or property as anything that is desirable at all. And there is no issue in providing. For example, I have a real world case in which one guy, he worked hard to buy a motorbike. And this is really cool motorbike, but he regards this as a commons for everybody. Seriously, right? And so he gets to use it, but he doesn't see it as his property. Everybody else can also use it when they need it. And I think this in part has to do with the sense of the ease at which your basic livelihood can be secured or not. Right? In a tropical environments, this is much more easy. So that moves back to the sourcing. If
Yep.
sourcing
Yeah,
becomes equally easy, and therefore also security becomes equally easy in any bioregion, then I think everything we're talking about here becomes feasible, much more feasible at least.
I think there's a step that you hit on, and then one we used to talk about a little bit more in Game B, we should start talking about more, is that the big transition probably is where we start to feel secure from our community, where our security is sourced from our community, not from ourselves. That may be the real first demark that we're building at Game B ethos. In kibbutz, a person who lives in a kibbutz that's been around for 100 years is secure. They're not going to throw you out unless you commit a crime or something like that. If you become sick, they take care of you. You basically, especially the shared purse kibbutzes, which is about 20% of the original kibbutzes, even your economic status won't change if you get sick or get injured or go insane or something. And that is probably a quite powerful phase change in human being and well-being to have to be able to give up the personal responsibility for your security for you and your family.
I've I've noticed something interesting in the context of the software company that I've built, I don't know, 13 years ago, where my business partner and I try to live this kind of ethos. So if somebody from the team is in need of support because I don't know, some family tragedy and simply has to take some time off, there are no question asked, and the person can go on healing and recovery mode for months without any detriments, no less pay, nothing, right? And we hold that space for that person, and we can afford that because we're still somewhat in a seller's market as a software company, but and that's we're very very happy and lucky about this. But at the same time, what I noticed was my business partner and I we treat this as a very egalitarian group. But when we tried to hand over also the responsibility for the company to everybody by inviting everybody into ownership of the company, they refused. They didn't want to take that ownership. So there's an interesting notion that also needs to be solved in that everybody wants a village, but nobody wants to be a villager, right? Because being a villager also comes with responsibility. But having a functional village that can carry you and that can give you that support and safety and security and all the things you need, that's very desirable, right? So part of the core function of the culture here is to incentivize being a villager.
That's interesting. It's interesting. I wonder if to what degree Game A has programmed people to just take and not have any real responsibility to give back.
Mm-hmm.
You give back in monetized work, which you may be very cynical about, right? You just go and do your job for 8 hours, and then that's that. You have no real commitment to your work other than not getting fired, basically. And there may be a lot of people that have been programmed into that by Game A over the years, particularly late stage Game A, where work has become very disconnected into piece parts, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a deprogramming question, right? And the part of that part of that is something that I'd really love to also explore in a separate conversation, which is something I noticed several times myself, and I heard it from Jordan very in a very tangible way, that where he described the situation, speaking with the person, explaining the dynamics of Game A, and the fact that it's destroying its own foundation, and what that means for the change of Game A or towards Game B. And a person rationally could understand, and then at one point it was almost like a mental emotional immune system kicked in and reset the entire understanding to the beginning of the conversation. And according to Jordan, this happened twice in that conversation. And the second time, he could even observe a dilation of the pupils. So there was an actual physical component to this refusal of the intellectual emotional immune system against the failure of Game B, and against the failure of Game A, and against what Game B has proposed, right? So that and the question is what are the ways people can actually step out of that, and how can people be actively supported in beginning to see that that problem, right? I think that's a worthy topic for another conversation.
Yeah, that one I think I can speak up a little bit more cogently. This has been an interesting conversation. Shows how much work there is to do yet on.
Yeah.